So I am Brad Pillow, as it shows on the slide there. I have presented, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 times or something at Indy.js. So I enjoy it, and I just hopefully we'll have another one, and at least from me in another 3 or 4 months, or when I get recuperated from this one. So tonight I'm going to talk about Svelte. But I'm also going to talk about Snowpack and Shoelace, the 3 S's. These are things that I'm playing with right now. Some of it at work, some of it not. So on that note, talking about work, and we'll see if this all works here. The company that I currently work for is called Cumulex here in Indy, in case anyone's outside of Indy watching this. Cumulex.com, and this is the obligatory advertisement here. We are hiring 2 back-end people and a DevOps person. Later in the year, we'll be hiring a front-end person. And then further later in the year, we'll be hiring someone else to come into the group with me to work on machine learning and analytics. So if you know anyone, anything that's underscored in here is a link. And I will be posting the PDF of this presentation into a repo I put on GitHub later. So you can pull down the presentation and click on the link and send the presentation to anyone else that's interested. And we are trying to hire relatively soon for these positions. So if anyone's interested, have them hop on it. So just so that you know, at Cumulex, we have developed the majority of our front-end software in Vue. So we are not doing a lot of Svelte, although I am at Cumulex, which I can explain some more about in a bit. Our backend system, if you're trying to explain to anyone, is basically Node, GraphQL, and TypeScript. So that sort of explains the jobs. If you're a DevOps person, you got to know Kubernetes. So enough said on that, and on to Svelte. So Svelte is another framework. If you have you've been asleep or not watching Twitter or not watching the programming parts of Twitter, it's come along in the last year or so. It is now another sort of alternative to React and Vue. It is fairly new and fairly young. It's a little bit different. It was created by a guy named Rich Harris, who works at the New York Times. And if you've gone to the New York Times website and seen any of the really cool visualizations, those are all done pretty much using Svelte and a thing called D3. But he originally developed it, my understanding, inside the New York Times. They open sourced it. It is an open source development with different open source contributors. So it is not sponsored by any company or by the New York Times. They like to call it the magic disappearing framework, because different than React and Vue, which both use a thing called a virtual DOM, which when React came out with it was quite groundbreaking. Everyone had always done jQuery, and you find a DOM element, you just poke things on it and watch it change. And it turned out that that was very inefficient if you didn't handle it correctly and did lots of updates. So React came along and said, hey, we'll keep a parallel copy of the DOM, and we will update that parallel copy as much as we want, but we will look for changes in that, and only when significant changes occur that need to update the actual DOM will we actually copy that over. So Vue and React both use that technique. It has a lot of advantages. It has some disadvantages. One of them, which you would encounter if you tried to use D3 with React or Vue, is that something like D3, or God forbid, if you want to use jQuery inside React or Vue, packages that directly like to manipulate the DOM don't really work well with frameworks that use a virtual DOM. Svelte does not use a virtual DOM. It actually touches the DOM, kind of like jQuery, and just directly manipulates it. But they did some really cool tricks. And when I first watched the video for Svelte coming out from Rich Harris, I did the exact same thing I did when I first watched the React video from Facebook and I said, this is a crazy idea. It's never going to work. It's no good. And then, watch the video 6 times more. And then you're like, wow, this is incredibly amazing. So hopefully you will find the same thing with Svelte if you play with it a bit. One of the really nice things about Svelte is that it's very quick and easy to learn, especially for beginners, at least I believe. We'll look at some code later. And it is the most performant right now of those 3, React, Vue, and Svelte. So on to the next. Snowpack is a new alternative to, say, Rollup and Webpack. It's a bad name because when you try to Google for Snowpack, you get all kinds of things about skiing and everything else. Kind of wish people would come up with names that actually were easier to Google, but it's up there. It's pretty cool. They just came out with their 3.0 version last week. So it is coming along. It's not a bundler. So Rollup and Webpack both take all of your code and they basically try to bundle it into a big package of JavaScript that they send to the browser. This has worked great for a long time. Everyone uses those kinds of things. Snowpack actually takes advantage of a thing called ESM or ES modules, which are new. And up until a couple of years ago, they weren't in every browser, but now they are supported by all modern browsers. So all of the code that I'm going to talk about, all these 3 S's tonight, are all targeted at modern browsers. So none of this IE 11 stuff. If that's your bailiwick, then ignore all of this. So Snowpack is very fast. It has built-in development server that starts up really quickly, potentially in 50 milliseconds. And it does hot module reloading like Webpack and Rollup, but the changes are even faster. And I can explain a little bit more detail how that works. Snowpack has the ability to do production optimized builds. So you can use Webpack and Rollup in your final deployment if you want to, but they just recently added in their 3.0 version support for a thing called ES build. ES build is a optimized build tool that is written, believe it or not, in Go, and is super speedy. It's like 100 times faster than Rollup or Webpack, and does the similar sort of thing as them in terms of creating production optimized bundles and builds. There's some controversy. You don't necessarily have to bundle everything. With Snowpack, you can actually deploy unbundled to a website and it will load in any modern browser. The reason that you bundle typically is to try to optimize HTTP transfer speed. But with HTTP2 support, if your backend supports that, you can load unbundled fairly quickly. And the beauty is if you're doing a progressive web app where you're caching things in there, then it might be better to not bundle, because if you just change one module, the only thing that updates when someone updates their PWA is just that one module. So lots of controversy on that. You can read more about that. Your mileage may vary. Snowpack has a lot of built-in support, just like Webpack and Rollup, for TypeScript and JSX and CSS modules and all that good stuff. And then they have all kinds of support for third-party plugins. So that's S number 2. S number 3, and I'm going to toss in 2 of them here with an I on the end, is a thing called Shoelace, which is this is their terminology, a forward-thinking library of web components. It's a very slick set of web components. We'll look at their site a little bit later. And Ionic is also another framework of web components. And it tends to be targeted more at mobile, but you can use it for desktop. Shoelace has a really high focus on accessibility. And both of them have built-in dark theme support, along with accessibility, which is pretty slick. So if you're not familiar with web components at all, again, this is another newer technology. It's a technology that's been around for, say, I don't know, probably 5 years, with varying amounts of support in the browsers. And probably in the last 2.5 years has actually gotten supported in all of the browsers. What web components allow you to do is to define a bunch of JavaScript that gets loaded at the beginning of loading your website, and it allows you to define custom elements. So you can essentially create your own div tags, p tags, h1, whatever the heck you want, and you can actually then use it natively in your HTML. So there were some issues, and there's a lot of controversy with web components, and even Rich Harris, the creator of Svelte, is not a big fan of web components, although they support web component creation. But I have found them pretty slick and a really quick way to get applications and websites up. But we'll look at that in a bit more. So let's see what I have next. So Svelte features, talked about this a little bit more. We'll go into Svelte here detail. No virtual DOM, again, means it's easier to interface to JavaScript packages that touch the DOM. D3 is just one of them, but there's a whole ton of charting packages, various kinds of things like that. A lot of packages that do SVG manipulation, and they want to directly touch the DOM. If you want to use those, you can just plop them right in Svelte and they work out of the box. If you want to use them in Vue or in React, you have to do a lot more stuff in onMount and unmount and things like this, and be careful that things are being flushed correctly to the virtual DOM. Svelte has TypeScript support. It's, I'll say, pretty good. It's not perfect. It keeps getting better. That came around, I think it was maybe back in September, which is sort of when I started looking at it, because when it originally came out, they had no TypeScript support. And being a TypeScript fanatic, I wasn't interested in it if it didn't have TypeScript support. Its syntax and semantics are really interesting. We'll go over them in a bit, but they allow you to write a lot less code, or at least in my mind. You can actually find on the web, there are a whole bunch of comparisons where people have written the classic to-do list application in React, Vue, and Svelte, and you can see the size differences. Again, I'll let you be your own judge of that. Svelte is moving up. It took the #1 spot this year in the 2020 State of JavaScript survey and nearly doubled in usage. The GitHub stars are going up dramatically. The thing you have to realize is it's a very new framework. Like I said, they only got TypeScript recently, and the whole framework itself, I think, is only like 1 3/4 years old. So React is the granddaddy here, and React has the full weight of Facebook behind it as well. So, but Svelte is coming along quickly. So I think you will find it something you should look at. So more Svelte features. So Svelte is not actually a framework in the sense of Vue or React. With Vue and React, there's actually a whole bunch of libraries that are getting bundled into your code that actually represent the framework for Vue and React. They handle the virtual DOM manipulation, mapping over events to their synthetic event system, a whole bunch of other things like that. There does not exist exactly that concept in Svelte. Svelte is actually a compiler that actually runs through all of your code and analyzes what you are doing with the DOM and what you are trying to render, and actually optimizes it into the correct code to render things in the best way and the most optimized way. So it tends to feel a little bit more like old traditional web programming when you write it, but it's actually doing all the things you need to make things fast without using a virtual DOM. And you can look on the web, there's plenty of performance comparisons between all the different frameworks. Like I said, great performance. When I show you some code, it's really straightforward. They're very aligned with the web platform. It has built-in store support, which is kind of cool. So when you go over to React and or Vue, you've got to decide, do I use Redux? Do I use hooks? Do I use context? Do I mash them all up together? If I go to Vue, do I use Vuex? Do I use the composition API? By default, Svelte actually has store support built in. It's very straightforward. It's very easy to use, and everyone uses it. They don't build any other stores. You don't need any other stores. Built into Svelte also is a scoped CSS not CCS, CSS, I got to fix that, styling, so that you can scope your CSS to your component. You know, Vue has this as well, and then React has it. You can use it by either using CSS modules, or you can use styled elements or things like that in React, but it's all built into Svelte. Svelte also has a component called Svelte Head, which is very similar to React Head, and I'm sure Vue has one too, I can't think of it, which allows you to inject things into the head within a component. Kind of handy. So what are the issues with Svelte? Well, because it's a compiler, it tends to move the complexity around a little bit, because in React or Vue, you're going to put breakpoints in your code inside some of its area where it tries to manipulate the virtual DOM. If you actually try to walk through some of the code in Svelte, it's highly optimized, but it can be fairly opaque. So if you run into what you think is like a Svelte bug, it can be a little bit harder to debug into it than Vue or React. But that's not a reason not to use it. It has a reactive syntax, which we'll go into, which is for components only, but you can make things reactive with Svelte stores. I know it's a lot of words. We're going to go to demos and code in a little bit, but I want to get through all this. It rendering blocks the main thread, as does Vue, and as does React, unless you're using concurrent React, which still is not released yet. So those are some things to consider if you want to use Svelte. Potential drawbacks, other ones, semi-immature tools. They're getting better all the time. Like I said, skyrocketing interest on GitHub. Best practices are still evolving. I've written a bunch of Svelte code. The best way to handle stores in Svelte. There's some good articles on it, but there's still a lot of, you know, what are the best ways and patterns to do this? We've run into the same issue at Cumulex using the Vue Composition API. What are the best patterns? These things are still being developed. Svelte has a fairly young library ecosystem, but it's growing really quickly. Fewer jobs today. I actually saw on Twitter a job for Svelte. It's like one of the first main posted jobs I've seen for Svelte. So maybe not as many jobs. I predict that's going to change, just like it did for Vue and React. It is a volunteer open source effort. So is Vue. And, you know, I don't know how much actually Facebook gives money to React or support, but they obviously give it a lot more than what Vue or Svelte can have. Syntactic sugar for reactivity. So I'm going to have to talk through this a minute, and then we'll go through it in a second. In React these days, you tend to use a thing called hooks if you're using more modern React to handle your local state and your reactivity. In Vue, you might use the local data, if computed variables, watches, or the Vue Composition API. Both of those are a lot more complicated, in my opinion, than the mechanism that Svelte has come up with. Up until recently, I put this link in here to a reactive debugger. One of the issues with doing the reactivity in Svelte is that you kind of have to put a lot of console logs in it, because there was, up until recently, nothing like the Redux or the Vuex Chrome extensions. So you couldn't kind of look and see exactly what was going on. So you had to revert to console logging. This reactive debugger is a link which will take you to the GitHub repo that a guy just recently developed. So it's pretty slick. There's lots of syntactic sugar for declaring props, for stores automatically subscribing, unsubscribing. All of the data stores are RxJS observable compatible, which is kind of cool if you're familiar with RxJS or not. It makes, there's some neat properties you can do with it. Svelte has a huge support for doing transitions, which is pretty slick. So it's great for doing animations. They tend to focus a little bit more on event forwarding. So emitting events from components, catching them up above, as opposed to prop handler drilling, which React is a little bit more big on that pattern. Vue is kind of a mix. One of the things that's very different in Svelte from Vue and from React is that they actually have optional two-way binding. So it actually makes doing forms very simple. If you've done a form in Vue or a form in React, you know you have to go through some hoops to get them to work because it's only one-way binding. So we'll talk about in a little bit. Let's see here. Batteries included. This is from this guy's blog. He had a couple of things which are nice. Transitions, like I said, very easy to do in Svelte. Animations, again, pretty much out of the box. The scoped styling, as I mentioned, really good. And the Svelte head replaces these other React components. Okay, so let's look at some code. Give me a second to switch screens here. Okay, let's see if this works. Wow, hang on a second. Let me gotta bring this up size-wise. Okay, I think everyone can read that. Yes. Okay, so the best way to learn Svelte, and one of the easiest ways, is they have this wonderful tutorial, which is basically an online REPL. It basically will step you through, I'll show you over here, step you through everything that you can do in Svelte. And they've got a single example for each. And each one of these is actually more of a, which we'll see like on the next one, more of a, here's what we're trying to do, you go do it. If you can't get it to work, then you click the do it for me button and it shows you the code. So we're gonna start off here really quickly, easy. This is a Svelte component. It's called app.svelte. All Svelte components end in .svelte. Believe it or not, that is the whole thing. That's all you need. That is now a Svelte component. So any HTML pretty much that you copy over, unless it's got some weird script tags or other things inside it, is valid Svelte component just by itself by renaming it from .html to .svelte. So this simple one here called Hello World. Svelte components share a thing in common with Vue, which is they are SFCs or single file components. So basically your logic, your HTML, and your styling all go into a single file. And we'll look at this in a bit. Let's stick over and see what they have next here. So I'm going to show you this next one for an example, adding data. Basically, you can come down here and do the show me. And I'll explain this in a minute. So we're going to click on show me. So if you look at this here, what we have up here in the Svelte component, the way we isolate off the logic is we put them in a script tag. Now, if you're using TypeScript, then you would put in here a space and either language or lang equal TS, quote TS, and that gives you TypeScript. So your template, your HTML still exists outside of the script. So what this is saying here is I've got this variable called name, and we're going to set it to world. And then down here, this is effectively our JSX, our template like you would have in Vue. And so it's actually rendering it out here to uppercase. The REPLs are interactive, so I can actually just type there and it's constantly rebuilding and re-rendering. So this is a great, great way to learn Svelte. Let's see what they have next. We'll go through a few of these really quickly. Let's go show me here. This is, yeah, good old Rickroll. This is, what is this one? Control elements. I want to find a better one here. Hang on a second, let me go over here. So this is styling. So give you an idea of the styling here. So again, your style goes within style tags in the same single file component. And again, this stuff all updates also in real time as we're doing the REPL here. So you can experiment, and this is pretty much just all standard CSS you can put up in there. There are, these are scoped. So these are scoped just to this component. So nothing else outside of this component will see the paragraph styling. There is a global tag that you can put on any of the elements to create, make the CSS go into the global scope. Let's see what they got over here. So let's go over to props real quick first. Do a show me. So the way that you do props, and we're going to look at the component. This is the outer component. You can have multiple tabs in here. This is our component that has props. So the way that you do props is just like one of the previous components where we did the let some variable value. You put export in front of it. So export let answer makes answer a prop for this component. And as you can see down below, we're rendering the answer is curly braces, just like a lot of the other frameworks. And so if we go back up here, this is the main app that's calling that component. We import the component. All the components, when you import them, they are exported as default. So you can rename the component whatever you want when you import it. So, you know, we could have called it something other than nested. Just like JSX and a lot of the other items, we pass the value to the prop, and then we see it down here. So we go there, we got that. So props are pretty straightforward. You can have a default value on a prop. Let me go over here. Oops. So when you do export let, you can give it a value, and that is the default value for the prop. Just like you can have default values in Vue and you have default values in React. Go back over here, we see we didn't give it a prop value, so it is a mystery. Let's see, what else do I want to go over here? Yeah, we'll go over that one. Let's talk a little bit about reactivity. Click this down a little bit. Okay, so this right here is, again, one file. We've got the HTML-ish down here, and this is our logic up here. All of the things that we declare in here, like this function handle click, are available down inside the templating, the HTML, which is why we're able to call it here. So this is a button here, and it says click count equal 1 times. So I'm going to click it once, and what you notice, click it again, I get 2 times. So what's happening here is that any of these declarations that we make locally are reactive local state. So we don't have to do anything special. We don't have to do a use state. We don't have to declare other things like that. Anything that's got a let in there is automatically a reactive local state. So that, I mean, that right there just saves you a whole ton of code, because this handle click is, you can pretty much see what you can look at it here, and I think it's very easy to read and see what the intent is and see what the code is doing. Now, behind the scenes, so let's see here, we're going to look at the JS output. So this is actually what's there, and this is what the compiler is doing, and it is generating everything to say, oh, they changed this variable, did they change the other variable, then we need to do this. It's generating this optimized code. That's what the compiler is. So there is no framework, which is why they call it the disappearing framework, because the framework disappears. Your code just gets compiled into optimized state and DOM manipulation. And that is the CSS output. We didn't have any CSS in here. So like I said, if you hit low somewhere down in the source debugger, then you start looking at some of this stuff. That can get a little bit opaque, but I have not had any issues framework-wise with Svelte, so it seems to be fairly well tested and everything. So I just wanted to show you that to explain what I was showing earlier. Let me see what's over here real quick. So you can have reactive declarations to see that well. When I first saw the first videos for Svelte, this is when I went, what? So they co-opted this $: is called a label statement. It's a valid thing in JavaScript. It pretty much normally does nothing. but you can use these, and they have co-opted this for their reactivity. So we're declaring a local state here called count, set to 0. We're going to create here another piece of state, but the $ in front says this is reactively updated state. So anytime count changes, doubled should change to 2 times count. Again, the handle click, and over here, pretty much the same thing we had before. So now if we do this, you'll notice that basically everything is doubled down here. And again, the reactivity is, in my mind, really straightforward. To get that reactivity, we just put that $ there. Now, the interesting part about the $: these reactive statements, is that the best way to think of this is like an Excel for state UI. Basically, when you do these $, you can build $, more levels, more lines, and you can keep building these things up. And what the compiler is doing is it looks at your code and it is figuring out who depends upon what, and what depends upon the next thing and everything else, and effectively doing sort of like Excel does. It's creating this big dependency graph, and then it's compiling that down into optimized code to update all of those variables and your rendering. Again, I think it's slick. Let's see a couple other things we want to look at here. Okay, so like I said, some of these, they only recently came out with a reactive debugger or extension. So, but it's really not that bad, because you can actually do a couple of interesting things here. I'm going to do the show me. So you can actually write reactive statements that look like this. So what's going to happen here is that basically the bottom part, that still is the same. So I'm going to click this. I click it a bunch of times. There we go. So yeah, hopefully you saw that. Yes. So the reactivity is kicking in there and automatically doing the alert and setting it back to 9. You can have incredibly, amazingly complicated reactive things that depend on each other, and deeper things that depend on other things. And again, it automatically optimizes it and figures out the optimal way to update all of this. Okay, so updating arrays and objects, you run into a similar issue if you have not done a lot of Vue or React, in that when you are updating an array locally, you do effectively have to do a cloning or an assignment update. You can't in place update the array, or you will basically blow away the reactivity. See what else I want to cover here for a second. Let me look back over at my slides real quickly. Two-way binding. Let's see here. Let's look at, I'm going to jump around just a bit here. They have the ability, so you can create your own REPL on this REPL site. You can log in and you create your own REPLs that you can save and share with others on Twitter. They have, okay, I lied. I'm going to go back one more. I went too far. So logic, you got to have logic over in your rendering, right? So how do they do that? Well, sort of like, this is going to seem a little bit Vue-ish, less JSX-ish. Basically, again, we've got state up here. We can toggle state. They basically have these templating sections here. So you can say if user.logged in, that's going to be this state here. Then display this stuff. If user is not logged in, display this stuff down here. We can log in, log out, log in, log out. They, of course, they have to have else blocks. So you can have this here, if else, which give us the same thing as before. And I was going to show you. So they also have, whoops, that. So it'll show you things that are broken, and then you're supposed to go fix it. So they have each blocks. So those are basically the ways that you iterate through things in the component. So each cat's as, and then this is a destructuring of the cats, which is going to be down here if I bring it up. So you can see this is basically running through these loops of cats up here. It's running through the array and it's rendering it down here. What I was going to show you is they also have, which is kind of slick, they have this, which is each item else. So what you can do is you can do each, but you could, this is just shorthand. You could say if item.length is 0, render this thing, else render that thing. This is basically their shorthand for that. Each item as items, items as item, else if there are no items, do this. Okay, let me go back over to, like I said, you'll want to, these links all be in the presentation. There's so much over here to explore, but it's a lot of fun just going through each of these. We're gonna look over here. So this is an example of doing event handling. Local state, handle mouse, on mouse move. So everything is on colon click, on colon mouse move, on colon mouse up, on, you know, all the standard events are all propagated normally. Let's see here. They have event modifiers, show me, which allows you to do on click, once capture all the passive stopping propagation of events, all the classic things you would hope for. DOM event forwarding, I'll let you look at that on your own later. Oh, I forgot to go back. Along with if and else, and this stuff comes in really handy if you are doing, if you're doing GraphQL. Basically, this is not GraphQL, but we're going to await some data, and this function up here, and we're going to let this promise. And of course, because this is a let and it's up in here, this promise is reactive. So if we go down here, we can basically do this cool thing, which is we can say await promise. So if we've gotten our promise, then if we're waiting the promise, then show waiting. Else, if we get it, then show the number, which is that's the value from the promise and the number, or we can catch the error. So you can actually do, and this is if you use GraphQL, there's a great GraphQL package for Svelte. And if you use it, you basically do a similar pattern like this. So waiting, numbers 82. So that's also a very slick piece of their templating. There's not a ton of other templating logic. That's mostly it right there. Oh, they have keyed each blocks, just like Vue and Svelte. If you have a whole bunch of things in a similar array, you need to key them, or you might need to get the key of them. Let's see what it's going to look at. CSS. So they have standard lifecycle, on mount, on destroy. I'm going to jump ahead here a little bit. I'll show you their store system. This is more complicated than I wanted. Stores basically, let's see your stores. So this is a store right here. Basically comes from Svelte store, writable. So this is creating a store, which just has a number in it. You could put an object in here as well. You can see that we import the store here, and we're going to reset the store. So we can set the store to a value. We can import the store here and create a function that increments the store. And that's done by using store.update, which then gives you the current value of the store. And you need to return the new value of the store after you've modified it. Decrementer looks the same. We go up here and we can go and do our plus, minus, and reset. So stores are very, very straightforward. You can import the store. It'll automatically subscribe to the store. In here, basically, they're showing off unsubscribing to the store, subscribing, unsubscribing if you want the value. You don't actually have to do this because they actually do this here, which is auto subscriptions. So in here, anytime you import a store, if you reference the store with a $ in front of it, again, it's the magic $ framework. That basically, if you do it anywhere in your code, that will automatically subscribe. And then when the component unmounts, unsubscribe from that store. So again, lots of shorthand, very syntactically succinct. but I think it's also fairly readable. Let's see, what else I want to go? Loop outs, transitions. So Svelte uses the concept of slots as Vue does, as do web components. React does not. That's because it has JSX and virtual DOM and a few things. But slots basically allow you to put information. So they have a file here called box.svelte, and basically they want to show me. I gotta do this. Show me. You want to inject some. You've got a component, but you want to inject some information into it. So you create a slot here, and then when we use the component out here, what's going to happen is all of this is going to get injected into that slot. So that's how you basically build compositional components that can take other components. They also have the ability, there's a whole bunch of things, I'm not going to go through all of them. Slot props give you the ability, which is really slick. This is a little bit crazy here. They give you the ability to basically say, I want to pass some local data, in which case here is hovering. I want to pass that into the slot. So the way you do that is you inject it over in that component, and then over here, you use basically this let hovering equal, and then that allows you to get that information from your hovering variable, your hovering state over in the slot, injected into the active, and so over here. So that way you can pass things from your component down into the slots. Okay, are we going on time here? Okay, let's do one more thing here before we move on. So again, oh, they got a pretty slick thing here too, which is kind of nice. You can do @debug basically anywhere in your code, and it will automatically log out that object into the console of your browser. So that basically makes it, and then of course, when you go into production builds, that goes away and things. So it makes it a little bit easier than having the console logs and doing the $; braces console log. So it's a pretty slick feature. Congratulations, we're done. There are a lot of extra Svelte tags. Like I said, there's head, which injects things in the head, body, which injects things in the body. Window bindings allow you to bind to window events on window resize. A Svelte component allows you to define a component at runtime and then inject that as a tag. And Svelte.self is pretty slick, which I will show you. I think this is the right one. Let me see here. Hang on a second. That's too complicated. We won't go through that one. They have context, just like Vue and React. It works well. Just like Vue and React, things in the context are not reactive themselves, but of course you can attach a store to a context and then pull the store off, and that is reactive. Goodness, let's see here. So classes, which is kind of nice. Like Vue, unlike React, you actually use the word class instead of class name that React forces you to use. Basically, anywhere, okay, here's our style here. So we have created this style here. It's button and dot selected. Basically, you can do a class. If we wanted to, we could, if we just wanted the styling for selected, we could have done class equal quotes selected, but this is actually a dynamic binding here. So basically what this does is say, apply this class if this expression evaluates to true. So it's kind of a shorthand for doing classes. This is the shorthand directive for classes, which is kind of slick. So big equal false. Here's our style called big. So if you name all these things the same thing, then you can just put class big, in which case, if big is true, then it will apply big here. Could be confusing, but it's kind of cool shorthand. Transition directives we'll do quickly here. Allow you to basically create different kinds of transitions built in from Svelte. And this is just basically showing you here fading in and fading out. Apply the transition fade from up here based on the state. They've got all kinds of transition stuff. Too much to go into detail here. So that's a good initial overview. So let me hop over back to slides here. I'll take a quick pause. Any questions from anyone before I go on? And I can't see the people's hands. Okay, I'm going to take that as a no since I can't hear anyone or see anyone. So hopefully I am still connected. Let's see, hang on.
Yeah, you're still here.
Okay, good. Sorry, I had too many windows open on my system. So it's
Yeah,
like, where did
no
it go?
problem.
Okay, so let me go. So those are basically, these slides have links to all of the things that I just showed you. So when you get the slides later, if you want to go back over that, I went through it really quickly. So I know it could be confusing, but again, the Svelte REPL playground thing is your friend and the quickest way to learn Svelte. And again, you can save off any of those and make them your own REPLs and then share them on Twitter or wherever else for people to play with. So Snowpack with Svelte. So I have a repo that I put up on GitHub, and it actually has a whole bunch of sub projects in it. So I will put the link up in the Meetup group later, and you can download it. I think there are 6 projects in there. There's a simple one, which I'll show right now, which is just your basic TypeScript Svelte. There's a Tailwind one. There is a Shoelace one. There's a Framework 7 one. There's a Material UI one. And I think there might be one more in there that are basically just meant to show how do you get these different frameworks working with Svelte and with Snowpack. So let me go and switch windows again. So, okay, let's, I'm gonna have to get that bigger. Oh my, is that readable enough? I hope so.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So this is the repo right here. It's got all these projects in it. Basically, you pull down the repo, you go into the folder, and then you run a yarn or npm install inside the folder, and you can run each of these. All of them are yarn start will get you going. So I'm going to see in 1 second if I can get this to. Okay, I gotta split this. I know this is gonna be really scrunched, but this is the basic Svelte Snowpack. I already have it running over here. Basically, I just wanted to show you. We have a. Let me close this over a little bit. There's to run Snowpack. You got a Snowpack config file that tells Snowpack what your public URL is, where the source for the build is. These are plugins. This is a plugin that handles Svelte and Snowpack. This one handles .envs if you're familiar with using .env files for development, and this gives you TypeScript. This is their new optimizer, which uses ESBuild to do the bundling. It says you want to bundle it, you want to minify it, and what you want the target to be. This just says what I want to serve on from my server, which is, of course, up here. So you also have a Svelte config. This is pretty much Boilermaker. Yeah, that too. The boilerplate right here, this is just how you get TypeScript into it. And everything else. So if we go down here, let's see, we've got an index. Open this up. This is basically how you start off with your Svelte app. We're going to import a component called app. We're going to set it to be on the document body. We're going to export the default app. This is for hot module reloading. This is again boilerplate right here. This is our app right here. Again, this is our logic up at the top. It's just doing on mount. So when the component's mounted, it's just starting a timer. This is just showing some HTML. And then this is doing the CSS. This again is the global tag that I mentioned. So this says, put this CSS on the body tag globally. So if we go back over here, I've had this running for obviously a while, 4,954 seconds. But if we go back over to somewhere in here, we can go over here and we can put basically some exclamation marks. So what's interesting is how fast this is building. So I actually have my VS Code set to automatically save every 200 milliseconds as I type. So basically, if I start typing like this, that's how fast it's basically updating the HMR in the app. So as you can tell, it's on the order of 50 to 100 milliseconds. Not as fast as I can type, but I'm a crappy typer anyway. So the beauty though is that you can basically just, if you want, you can actually do like I've done here, have your VS Code open in one window, set your autosave to 200 milliseconds, and just start typing away your code, and your app will immediately update all the time. And if you didn't notice it, again, just like hot module reloading, typically, we kept our state. See, we still have the time. I've had this open for thousands of seconds. So explaining how hot module reloading works is beyond me right now. I think it's pretty much as close to magic as I've ever seen in the development world. But it's even faster in Snowpack, because what happens in Snowpack, what happens in Webpack is that on this small application, Webpack would be near as fast as Snowpack. The issue is that right now, when I change this code here inside app.svelte with Snowpack, all I'm doing is I'm recompiling app.svelte, and I'm just replacing that module over in the browser. In Webpack, I'm basically compiling it and then bundling it back into some part of it and then sticking it back in the browser. So if my bundle is really small, like it is here for Webpack, it's going to be, hundreds of milliseconds too. You get to your 2-3 megabyte Webpack application, and as the guys at my work can tell you, it doesn't happen instantly. So that's the beauty here about Snowpack and using ES modules. So let's go look at another one here. Actually, I want to go talk a little bit more. Sorry. I'm going to go to the next thing here. So let me hide this again for a second. And we're going to go to talk again a little bit about Snowpack. So ES modules, they're slick, they're new, they're supported everywhere. It's the wave of the future. They're in like Node 15, and it's going to be the wave of the future for Node as well. So learn what they are, learn how to use them. It is the thing. Like I said, updating as you type, which I showed you there. On previous versions of Snowpack, what Snowpack tries to do, and it's the same thing that Rollup tries to do too, is that if you import an NPM package, which many of them are in common JS style or format, it tries to wrap it and turn it into an ES module. Rollup and Snowpack are really good at it, and this is less of an issue, but a year or two ago when I played with Rollup, you can sometimes find older NPM packages, I mean, we're talking old, where it just doesn't wrap it quite right. There are some really weird common JS isms going on. So just again, beware of that. And again, the speedy hot module reloading. Okay, so now we can talk about Shoelace. Shoelace, these are their words from their website, which we can look at in a minute. Works with all frameworks. The beauty of web components, if you build a UI toolkit, not framework per se, but a bunch of UI elements in web components, you can use it with Vue, you can use it with React, you can use it with Svelte, you can use it with plain old HTML, JavaScript, etc. So it's pretty cool. Works with CDNs for speedy. You can customize them with CSS. Web components have some, they used to have more issues with customizability, but now it's really quite nice. Again, most of the web component frameworks come in with built-in dark theme. You just change a CSS property and boom, everything flips around. Shoelace is built with accessibility in mind. And I've done a bunch of Lighthouse score testing on all of these. And Shoelace always scores the highest on accessibility. So I'm not sure what they're doing, but they do good, very high scores. Let's see here. So modern web component, fast, easiest style, as I mentioned, and lazy loaded. Now this is important on Shoelace and Ionic. So both of them are web components. So you might be thinking, the way you include these is basically you just include them directly in a script tag in your page. So you don't actually even bundle these in. To which case you might be thinking, oh my goodness, man, that's going to be this like massive 5 megabyte framework and my page is going to be super slow to load. And that's not the case. Shoelace and Ionic are both developed using a framework called Stencil that was developed by the Ionic folks, particularly for building optimized web components. And what's interesting is that they do basically a cool thing, that they have the framework, the UI elements load, and they load as web elements, but they're basically proxies or shims. So they're very tiny. So the first thing that gets loaded when your page gets loaded is basically empty web elements. And those empty web elements, empty-wise, code-wise, point to all of the other code that actually comprises the entire UI toolkit. And what happens is that when you actually finally hit one on a page, it lazy loads that. So it can be very fast. You know, if you only have a site, and I'll show you in a minute, with 2 buttons on it, you know, it's going to be as fast or faster than just about anything else loading because they're going to load lazily. Shoelace focuses on accessibility. Like I said, they have a really strong theming package. They use modern web tech. That's what a lot of these people are focusing on. Constraint validation for forms, which is an older API, but continues to get improvements and is nice. And they've really taken advantage of it for doing form errors and alerts using the native browser validation as opposed to popping up your own span with some red colors in it and stuff. CSS part styling is new. It's available everywhere now, but that allows you to say in a web component that maybe is a slider, I want to target some CSS to style the knob within the slider. And you can actually do that now with the actually HTML slider. That was part of that people always had a pain with. They had to overlay a regular web slider to get something on it. You can actually go in and you can inject CSS to change the knob part of a slider. So let's look real quickly here at, this is Shoelace. Let me increase it. So like I said, basically, if you want to use any of their stuff, you just add these two tags. One is for the CSS and one is for the web components. Once you've added those to the top of your page, you can basically just do this tag here. You now have new tags, SL-button, and suddenly you're using their elements. They have all the typically common elements of things that you would want. Check boxes. They've got really good documentation. You know, your classic card, and these are all just, this page is actually just straight HTML, JavaScript. So demoing how it does work that way. Spinner switches, tab groups, you know, it's kind of material UI-ish sort of kind of thing, but it's got pretty much everything that you need for doing an application. So let me go back over here. And in fact, what I've done here, Nope, wrong one. Hang on. I'll give you an example here. This right here is a Svelte. It's up in the REPL. And basically, you can see right here, we're using Svelte head to inject the different things that I just mentioned, the Shoelace and Ionic. So the interesting about web components is Shoelace is a set of UI elements. Ionic's a bunch of, web components. Ionic's a bunch of them. You can actually use them together. You can mix and match all the web component libraries that you want to, as long as they all have different element names, which typically most people tend to prefix things with SL, in this case for Shoelace. So we've just added that. That's going to get injected into our head and loaded. And then basically now we've got a whole bunch of Ion dash, which are Ionic's elements, and we've got the ones for Shoelace. So as you can see right here, I've got a dialog. I've got a bunch of Ionic app here. This is a toolbar. This is a footer. And these things, what's kind of cool about Ionic is that it correctly handles, which is a pain in the butt to do, correctly resizing progressive web apps like this for an iPhone, so that when you turn the Safari header off and on, everything correctly expands out and so on. Trust me, it's a pain to get right, and they did it right here. So this basically shows you right here that none of these are actually HTML elements, but as you can see right here, I can do this and I can open it. I've got the dialog, everything built in, and that is the entire entirety there. I don't even think I used this extra component here. So it's pretty slick that you can mix and match these different frameworks, and they are pretty comprehensive frameworks. Like I said, they load very quickly. They get really good lighthouse scores. Okay, where's next? Let's see here. So back to this UI libs for Svelte. You can use Tailwind. Let me go show you that. So if we go back over here, we're going to go to the Tailwind. So classic Tailwind, right? 500 million class names. Tailwind is simultaneously cool and a pain. It's an interesting technology. I don't use it for a lot, but a lot of people really like it. So this is basically straightforward, and I've got it running on this guy here. Let me go find it here. Hang on a second. So we're going to go over here, and we're going to modify this guy. This one I may not have set up. Let me see here. Hang on a second. Correctly. Let's see here. Reload. Why is that working? Okay. Demo fail. I don't know what was going on with that. But you can play with it over in the repo. A caveat that I have for Tailwind is that of all the frameworks that I tried, every other framework, when I start it up, starts up in like 50 milliseconds. I'm immediately into the app. Tailwind, because of the way it's set up, it has to go through an initial post CSS of kind of like digesting the like 4 megabytes of classes that Tailwind is. And I'd say it takes more like, 40 seconds to start up with Tailwind, which is another reason that I'm not using it. Go back over here to the next thing. So Material UI web components, you probably didn't know this, but Google actually has a set of web components that all implement Material UI. They're pretty slick. They kind of started with a bang, and then they kind of waffled for a bit, and then now they seem to be getting some more juice behind them. It's typical Google stuff, right? They get interested in something, then they get bored, and they get interested in it again. One of the things I don't like about Material UI web components is that you do bundle them. They don't have a lazy load ability, and you actually have to import and bundle every single little component. It's kind of annoying. Framework 7 and Framework 7 Svelte is a really cool desktop / mobile / whatever framework. But when the app complexity gets more than a little bit, they have a built-in router and things, and I run into occasional problems with it in conjunction with Snowpack. They recommend Rollup, but in conjunction with Snowpack, because I want it as fast as possible. I don't know. I've had problems. So just your mileage may vary. There's Bootstrap. There's 2 other Material UI MUI libraries. There's Bulma. There's all the typical things people have wrapped for Svelte. There is even a Svelte native, which is pretty slick. And what that allows you to do is write Svelte and actually build native iOS and Android apps. And that is all done by the native script folks, if you've ever looked at their stuff. So it's pretty cool, pretty slick. It's relatively new. It seems to be well supported, but I don't think there are a ton of people using it yet. So again, that one's a little bit more unsure. Let me see here, what's next? So resources, the Svelte docs are great. The REPL tutorial that I showed you is fantastic. These are a bunch of other links. I would recommend that you check these out when I post it. Won't go through it in detail right now. This is, I thought was particularly a nice blog entry that a guy wrote. Oops, can't do that. On React hooks versus Svelte. So if you're coming from a React end of things and you're like, how does this all map? Because if you're a React aficionado, then hooks are everything. And you're like, well, what happens when hooks are gone? This Joy of Svelte is a developer who's published one of those digital online books you can pay different prices for, kind of thing. Pretty comprehensive. Front End Masters has a video series done by, I think it's only a couple hours long, but it's done by Rich Harris himself. This Svelte Ionic app is a pretty good comprehensive demo app on using Svelte with Ionic. And then, of course, just like awesome everything else on GitHub, there's an awesome Svelte link that will show you all the things that are going on. Let's see here. We went through the different REPLs, which I showed you. So I don't think we have to go back through those again. Snowpack docs are there. Basically, they have, I will admit that one of the most impressive thing about all 3 of these S's is that Snowpack, Shoelace, and Svelte have extremely well done and extremely comprehensive documentation. Something that you don't often find in the development world. So my hat's off to them. Here's some resources for Shoelace and Ionic. We went to the web page earlier. There's more Shoelace, a couple of blog posts, Ionic, and then that last link is to that little REPL that I showed earlier. And that's it. So I can show more demo things if people want, but otherwise I'm done. So I'm happy to take questions if anyone has any.
Well, I would say thank you for that. That was excellent. I think questions great. If anybody has any questions they want to jump in with.
See, I don't have the window open with the, I don't have the thing. So if no one's, is anyone showing hands up or things?
I do not see any hands at the moment.
Cool. I would highly recommend you go play with these things. I will put the link in a little bit to, I got to turn the presentation in PDF, but I'll put a link to the presentation and the repo up in the Meetup group. So I highly encourage you to play with these. The speed at which you can develop with this, to me, is amazing. And this ability to basically do all of your state as almost if you were just writing out Excel expressions is a I think is a pretty cool breakthrough. It's definitely a different way of thinking about things. So just like going from jQuery and Knockout and all those previous folks and switching over to React and Vue, this is again a little bit of a it'll grow some new neurons in your brain. So that's always a good thing. So definitely check it all out. Web components are slick. Again, they sometimes get a bad rap. And that's because for several years they were screwed up essentially, and Google was about the only one sort of pushing it. But they work really well now. And Snowpack, I think, is the future of bundling and development. So check them all out. You will have fun.
Brad, you mentioned the some of your links there, the transitions from React to Svelte. There's a question here regarding someone who's a bit newer to the JavaScript world. Do you have any other recommendations on how to dive into something like this, framework like this, if you're somewhat new to JavaScript and React?
The best way is that REPL, the Svelte docs, and just start with the Hello World one, the beginning one, and then just work through each page. You can fork any of the pages that you see there and have your own copy. You have to log in, but once you do that, you can fork them and create your own REPL. So you can create your own sort of learning experience that way. And I would recommend just walking through those. There's about, I don't know, there's like 80 of them or something, but walk through them, go through the first 20 and then go back and go through the first 20 again. And maybe a third time, I don't know, somewhere in there, it will really start to gel. The beauty is that for someone totally new, the styling and the HTML part is almost just styling, CSS and HTML. I mean, it's only just a fragment away from that. So if you've done any CSS and any HTML, you can stick both of those and you have a component. So, and as I mentioned on these things here, you can create files that call other files and extra components. So it is a little IDE in and of itself. So this way you don't have to worry about tooling. You don't have to get the VS Code, any of those other things. You can just start literally with just the REPL here. And then you can, if you log in over here, which I'm not, you can save it, you can fork it. And I forget what this one is. They need some hovers. There you go, full screen editor. And that one is download the zip file, and that's save it. That's save it to the web, the REPL, and then this is fork someone else's. So if you wanted to play around with the shoelace one I have, it's in the links. You could grab it, you could fork it, and then go edit it and play with it. So this I think is one of their slickest features, is having this all built in. This is the REPL part, but again, this tutorial part, which is at svelte.dev/tutorial, is basically the best way to go and just start and work your way through each of these, which covers, so how many are there? I don't know. It says 19 sections, but there's like 80 steps. But that covers basically the entire Svelte framework. I would start there before you go to Snowpack and Shoelace or Ionic or any of the other things, because that by itself is all easily learnable. I think it's a great way for newbies, especially because it's just only a little bit beyond CSS and HTML. So it's a great entry point.
Have you been able to crash this REPL?
I haven't intentionally tried, but so I can't tell you. I don't know. You basically, if you do script and then you start, you basically will get errors down here. So it's compiling and showing you. I don't know if you can see it full screen. Let me.
Yep. Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. So it's a pretty good little, pseudo IDE, but it's a really good. It's a great way for beginners. It's how I learned it. I just went through this tutorial. It's very well done. Like I said, the whole pacing of it is really basically they tell you everything over here. They explain it to you. And then the idea is they tell you how to do it and you can go do it on your own and see it happen. Or if If you're like me and you're lazy, you hit show me and then it does it for you. So yay for all lazy coders. So yeah, so for at Cumulex, we have a video player. And this video player that is for our security stuff and everything. It does a lot of crazy complicated stuff. It does peer-to-peer connections over WebRTC. It's doing a lot of various things with the video. When we wrote our first application, that player was embedded. It was written in Vue and it was embedded into the Vue application. The problem is that we have potentially other applications that we are building, and we also have third parties that we want to use this video player so they can build their own security applications based on our APIs. The player is gigantic. It's very complicated. There's no way in heck we could ever explain to anyone else how to build their own, and they wouldn't want to because it would take them forever, like it has for me. So what we did was to basically turn that into a web component, and it's all written in Svelte. And I know the code has to be, probably half of what it would have been if I'd written it in React or Vue, just because there's lots of state, there's lots of logic in that state, and the ability to just write these reactive expressions. Let's probably use some better, some better examples here, but just the ability to do that, just, $: here's my thing, I want it to be reactive, is just, it's half the code that you have basically. I mean, you're not going to have half the HTML and you're not going to have half the CSS, but the business logic itself is just a lot simpler. It's easier to read, I think. You can kind of read it, like you would read, like you open up a cell in Excel and it says, this cell is equal to these 4 things. It's exactly what this is. There are some caveats. You can easily screw yourself over, and you can screw yourself over in Excel too, because you can say, set A to 5 and set B to 5, and C is equal to B, and D is equal to, you can create circular dependencies is what I'm basically getting to. And you can do this over in, I call it circular dependency import hell too. Most people don't encounter it, but when you first encounter it, you'll scratch your head for a long time wondering why that module that is there and you import is undefined. And that's because you have imported a module which imports you. And so it's a circular dependency and it's undefined. So you can screw that up too and create those sorts of things as well. I mean, you can do the same thing over in React and Vue, but it gets so easy to write these reactive statements that they just sort of flow off your fingers. You sort of forget sometimes that things, you got to be careful about how things depend on each other. Long answer to your question, sorry.
I've got a quick question. Are you using Svelte with any kind of like server-side backend, data layer or state management or something like that?
No.
And what's your tooling like?
Sure. Right now, the Svelte web component we're using does talk to a socket IO server and some things, but that's sort of irrelevant to the question that you have. I've actually got another repo I'll probably put up eventually that shows using Svelte with GraphQL. That will eventually maybe segue into my future talk on Cloudflare workers. So I've done a GraphQL backend and a Cloudflare worker, and then I have a Svelte application that shows how to use that with the GraphQL being served up by the Cloudflare worker. So whenever I post that on GitHub and make it public, it's up there, it's just not public. That will show how to do that. There is a really slick thing coming out. So I didn't mention 2 other things. The Svelte guys have a thing called Sapper. So Sapper is sort of like Next.js or, gosh, what are the other ones? They're not rolling off my tongue right now, but they're basically server-side rendered or pre-rendered site handling. So the big thing, of course, everyone wants to do a lot of times is make their site as fast as possible, and they also want to make it SEO compliant. So the way that you do that, of course, is you either pre-render everything to a bunch of HTML, where the pages get loaded and then they get what's called hydrated, which means that then the React view or Svelte gets reconnected and starts running and then takes over the application. Or they are server-side rendered, and you do that because you have back-end data. A good example would be a COVID website, right? So that data is changing all through the day, but it's not changing every time. It's changing once an hour. Hopefully it's not changing every second. But basically what's going to happen is, someone's going to hit an endpoint for your website, and it's going to go, wow, something changed in the database. So we're going to re-render that to a new static page so that we can serve it up to anyone else in the future really quickly. So they have a package like that called Sapper, and it's there. But recently, Rich Harris also fell in love. The creators fell in love with Snowpack, and so they've developed a thing called SvelteKit, which is basically a pre-rendering or server-side rendering of Svelte that works with Snowpack and has a bunch of built-in backends for Next.js and a bunch of other ones. It's all alpha, and just you can do get it from Git as at next, but it's not really ready for release. But it is their next big thing if you want to have sort of server-side data rendered Svelte sites. So that may have been what the question was about. So that will be coming out, I'm guessing, 4 to 8 weeks.
Yeah, I was asking more along the lines of the GraphQL and Cloud Workers thing. So I'm excited to have that talk in a few months.
Yeah. Put me out like 3 months or something, and then we'll do that one. And then I'll show how to use Svelte with GraphQL and Cloudflare Workers. This does not roll off the tongue, but yeah.
Sounds good. Any other questions for Brad? Cool. Well, thanks, man. This is a great start to the year. I think a lot of really interesting stuff, new to me, and I'm excited to dig into it for sure.
Yeah, it's cool. Definitely play with it when I get the stuff up there. So, yeah, thanks everyone.
Yeah. Steven, I think you can stop recording if you want.